interestingly as well, our final discussion point, which are around approaches to supporting childhood wellbeing, resilience and educational outcomes. And our first this afternoon our author group from Cardiff Metropolitan University, and I understand that we have Gary Beecham, Chantel Hornton and Susan Davis, who are going to talk about wellbeing and outdoor learning, a case study from Wales in an ancient woodland. So I'll hand it over to you, and hopefully the gremlins will not be in the works for your presentation. I'm not sure if anybody's responding to me, but I can't hear anyone, so it might be on
I think
maybe.
Chantel was struggling to get access this morning, so I'm wondering if she's still struggling to get in, because she was booted out at the same time as me this morning. She did email us earlier. Why don't we move on, Sarah, to the next presentation, and I'll go on my email and see if she's emailed.
Thank you. I haven't had anything, so I don't know yet. That's okay. No problem. So park that just for a little while, and we'll go back to the ancient Welsh woodlands in a minute. And I'm just going to move on to introduce Chris Ludlow, who's here from the University College of Birmingham. Hi, Chris. Nice to see you.
Hi. Are you okay?
Hi. Yes, we can hear you. You're a little in the bottom of a pond, but we can hear you a little bit, so that's okay.
Is that right? Okay. It's probably the best way to hear me, to be honest.
That's better. No, not at all.
Okay.
Chris is going to talk about his book chapter, which focused upon the role of mindfulness in supporting wellbeing young children. And I'm just going to drop in, Chris doesn't know I'm going to say this, but I am just going to drop in that Chris is the founder of the Thought Bubbles Education Organisation as well. So I'll put the link in the chat for you, and I'm hoping you might be able to add a little bit around that into the discussion, Chris, if that's okay.
Yeah,
so I'll hand
that's
over
no
to
problem. You. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to try and share my PowerPoint now. Is that all right?
Good luck.
Yeah, this is going to be one of those moments. It might not work. I've been lecturing this morning, so I've got a couple open. So just make sure that you get the right one. I'm sure you don't want to talk about phonics. Right, let me just see this. So on here, I don't usually use this platform. How do I share?
So you know your top bar where you've got your little chat box and your hand up and your three little dots, and you've got the camera on the right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then there's the mic, and then there's a little box there. And if you click on that little box, it'll show you how you can share. It's Control plus Shift plus E. So if you open it on your desktop, Control, Shift and E.
Control, Shift, E. Okay. Oh, right. Okay. Yes. Okay. Great. Right. Okay.
We haven't quite got it yet, but it should come.
No, that's fine.
Ah, yes, here we go. Lovely.
Here we go. Right, I'm not on the right slide. Okay, so I guess thinking about meditation and mindfulness with young children, and well, one of the things that I'm really aware of is that mindfulness is something that has been, I don't want to say bandied around, but has been talked about with young children. Kind of not just with young children, but with adults as well, and perhaps with older children. And a lot of work's been done already prior to anything that I've done. But I suppose that what I'm always concerned about, that for me, something that it could be really, really valuable in our work with young children is something that could also be lost as almost like seen as another kind of fad. So I was really grateful to have the opportunity to discuss, in the book chapter, the kind of research and the things that have emerged from the research about meditation and mindfulness with children, and I suppose there are some common themes that have come up, and I haven't got a lengthy presentation today, but I wanted to just discuss, some of those themes that come up after I've kind of introduce myself, and just kind of think about perhaps some of the ways in which meditation can be useful in promoting resilience and well-being. I'm very, very keen that with children it becomes something over time. I think it's something that should be much more integral to the education system in this country, and I'll go through the reasons why later, and not something that's just an add-on. And also I think it's something that has a specific set of skills that build up to it. So there are things that I consider to be more valuable in terms of practice and so on and so forth. So if I just introduce myself a little bit, and a little bit about my research, and also a little bit about some of the secondary research that I've engaged with I hope that's useful. So in terms of who I am, I'm the leader of initial teacher education at University College Birmingham. We're quite a small institution in Birmingham. You may or may not know of us. We have previously been known as the University of Cakes and Bakes. So it was the College of Food and Tourism until 2012. So but we've got a growing program, and we have quite a number. We have an early childhood studies program, which I also teach on. We have quite a number of students on those programs. And prior to that, I've taught and led in schools in Birmingham, Walsall, and Staffordshire. So and my last position was as a deputy head in an infant school for some years. So my interest in meditation kind of began just over 8 years ago, and I have pretty much just about daily practice. And that kind of led me to consider, when I was completing my MA in education, focusing on how it might be useful for children. And at that point, I wasn't the only person to do that. Looking across at the kind of where research is in America and Canada, they are much further forward in terms of meditation for children. So that conversation is a lot probably by about 10 years further forward, and there are programs that are kind of well established that are used there, and some of the research that I'm going to talk about kind of comes out of those programs. I suppose one of the things that I get concerned about with young children is that, as always with anything that comes out, younger children get forgotten. And my research was focusing upon children who were under 7, and there were children. There was basically a year 1 class, a year and then a year 2 class, and then subsequently I also worked with a reception class. And I suppose one of my concerns with a lot of things in education is that young children kind of are perceived a little bit sometimes still as not being perhaps as capable, and they get left out almost. And so I wanted to look at, and it was quite an open investigation into how this might work, and I looked at it from the perspective of the practitioners. The other thing I was keen to do was have a look at mindfulness and meditation within a mainstream setting, in the sense that there were lots and lots of children there who wouldn't necessarily want to sit down and meditate. It would be quite very, very alien, as it is for many children, but it'd be very, very alien for them, and so on and so forth. So I wanted to see how that would work and what that would look like. And I guess from my perspective, it was very much for me, meditation came to me at a time when I was kind of very overstretched, quite tired and anxious. And it was through a book that was not actually about meditation really at all. It was a book in which the main character meditated, and it was a friend of mine kind of lent that to me, and just as out of interest. So meditation, I kind of was something that, as a result of that, I tried, and I predominantly use an online map. But I suppose one of the things I do with practitioners is, because growing out of my masters, I then wrote a program, and I've spoken at various conferences about working with young children, and mindfulness and the program's been used by various people, and still is to a certain degree. So I don't quite have as much time on it as I would like at the moment, but never mind. So I guess my thoughts about it really were what isn't mindfulness and meditation. And when I'm talking to people about it, and I wanted today just very briefly to discuss it, and I talk about this in my chapter, that first of all, it doesn't have to be religious. Very much what I follow is kind of secular sort of based skills, if you like, for meditation. It isn't just listening to calming music or sounds. There is more to it than that. And neither with children, and this was true of some of my research, is it an instant kind of solution. And I think that's really important, because it's very much helping children pay attention kind of to the moment, and have time to kind of sit non-judgmentally, focusing on their breath, and just pausing in what can be a very, very busy world for them. Okay, so it's that very much for children, providing them with that kind of non-judgmental focused attention and awareness, that those moments, and really with a big emphasis on kind of non-judgment, because one of the things that, and I talk about this briefly in the chapter, is that children are very, very judged. They're very, very tested, I think, in our society. And actually, this is one of those situations where you're not. So it was looking about whether mindfulness with children could have a positive impact on multiple areas of life, as it has with adults. And I know in my chapter, I very briefly discussed a little bit of history and how meditation has been used quite widely with adults, and how that by some practitioners is and I give some statistics in the chapter, how I think there are about 365 schools now that are have some sort of a meditation program in place. And so my kind of questions, and I guess the question that the chapter kind of considers, is from the research, is mindfulness or meditation a set of skills that can positively impact on children? Are they able to access it? Is it worth doing? And what kind of general results have we seen? So that kind of gives you a bit of a background to where we are. So I guess there is that with children, there's an ever increasing body of research. And if you were to put into, I'm sure most of you have access to university libraries, and if you were to put into, children and meditation, children and mindfulness, you'll see that there are, the studies have ballooned over the last sort of 7 or 8 years. And again, I think what I as I've said in the chapter, and I, really believe, we need a sense of caution. We need a sense of caution because many studies were conducted with smaller numbers of people. Some of the research relies on a certain amount of self-report from staff and children and so on and so forth. So there does have to be an air of caution. And in the chapter, what I tried to do really was kind of identify from the research the kind of key themes, and I think that's really important, because I think there are individual studies threw up certain things, certain quirks, but there are some key themes about children and meditation. I'll explain, kind of following the chapter, where my thinking is going with it now. So the kind of main things coming out of the research with children were very much around, a lot of it was around self-regulation. Okay, a lot of it was around self-regulation and behavioural self-regulation, and really coming from the, sorry, I can see that I've made a mistake there. It should say does, and it says, sorry about that. Okay, never mind. I promise I can spell. So improved behavioural self-regulation is really, really important, and the kind of decisions that they make. And it really comes, I think, from being able to watch your thoughts, and the idea in meditation that's really central to meditation, that you are not your thoughts. Your thoughts come and go, and you're able to watch your thoughts and not get too involved with them, and actually you can step back from the mind and you can pause, and there are health benefits that are associated with that, but very much that kind of self-regulation and the ability to step back a little bit and recognize that thoughts come and go. In certain cases, sustained attention, and I guess in my own research, I looked at it from the perspective of the practitioners and their feedback on the sort of design of the program and what they'd seen, and where it was often very useful to them was at the end of, and we scheduled it in for certain periods of time, and at the end of periods of frenetic activity, if they've been outside, break times, or if children have been involved in some sort of frenetic activity, and I used to use it always at the end of PE with reception, and it worked very, very well, and it started to get them thinking about their sort of mental health. But there's a very calming impact on that, and they were able to sort of more easily go into the next session of learning, which, as working with young children can be quite hard sometimes. In terms of anxiety, that's with older children. Some of the work that's been done with older children, there's a good study in Canada where there's been reduction in anxiety and depression. It's been associated in some studies with improved creativity, and also that reduction in cognitive rigidity, and that was certainly true coming through some of the research with children. But recognizing that there is potential bias and again, sometimes in some cases, a limited use of control groups. What you find with the research, and some of the research that I used in my chapter, is that actually the scale of the research, because of the topic and the fact that there are issues with children's mental health and children's well-being, that actually the studies are becoming longer and larger, and so some of the data that is coming out of them is kind of more valid. So, you know, and some of these have been done with children in kind of, you know, with various disorders as well. So again, with adults, a couple of the things that came out that may explain some of the things that we've seen in children is that while focusing on the breath, you know, there was that decreased sort of negative emotion experience, reduced activity in the amygdala. So increasingly neuroscience, which obviously hasn't been particularly conducted with children, is showing that there are genuine benefits to meditating. So it gives you an idea, while here, why some of those things might also be working with children as well. And again, this is thinking about, you know, less negativity, about being able to step out from our thoughts, and also that reduction of kind of feelings of stress and a greater ability to focus on the task in hand. And I think that greater ability to focus really came out of my own research as well. So there are some kind of key themes that come out of the research. And it's this that's really key. And I suppose the perspective on it is finding time for children, for young children, to spend some time in the present, spend some time sort of quietly in the present. You know, not just always thinking about the past, what's just happened before, not always thinking about what they're going to do next, but actually spending some time in the present. And part of part of meditation is not just about sitting down quietly and breathing, but also some of the work with children meditation are things like mindful eating and also mindful walks in the environment, with an element of kind of gratitude there, kind of, and children really recognizing what's around them and spending a little bit more time in the moment. So you know, that again kind of gives you a little bit of a background to it. But for children, one of the things that you know, I think the modern life of a child, and sometimes when I've spent a lot of time in early years settings and, you know, working in reception, nursery, and so on and so forth, that, you know, there's a lot for children. There's a lot of judgment there. There's a lot on children at the moment. You know, we think of, I did a lecture today and we were talking about assessment in the early years, and really the amount of kind of assessment there is, you know, moving forward through school as well. And there's that kind of layers and layers of thinking. So children are kind of well stimulated. Sometimes some of those earlier settings, wonderful though it is, you know, are very, very stimulating, and that's good. But I think at times there's a lot going on in those settings as well. And for children and practitioners, there's an awful lot going on. And what that really provokes, I think, in children, and it certainly provokes it in adults, is that kind of continuous thought, which, you know, continuous thought can become quite a challenging thing to deal with, to constantly be thinking. And I know that it was Descartes that said, you know, I am because I think, therefore I am. But actually, you know, sometimes that continuous thinking causes an awful lot of problems, and children have an awful lot on. So you're giving them some time out, really, for them to watch their thoughts and feelings, let their thoughts and feelings pass, and give them that, almost that break from it, and kind of reset them to a certain degree. So rule your mind, or it will rule you. And I guess that's very true. And I think where with adults we've certainly seen, you know, beginning to see some of it with children in the research, with the increased behavioural self-regulation. With adults we've certainly seen that, you know, come through, almost breaking some of those cycles of thought. So, you know, again, sorry, I know I've gone on a little bit here. I won't go on for too much longer, I promise. You know, we've had a lot here, and this was 2013, where children felt they're worried or sad at least once a week, with the number of children reporting that they felt sad once every 2 to 3 days. So by the time they were 11, you know, these figures are rising, and you know, become well known and well publicized. I guess the 370, I said 365, you know, 370 schools are incorporating it into their curriculum, and you can see from Catherine Weir there from Exeter University, who's done an awful lot of research, you know, there is an impact on health. I think one of the things that we have to consider is that the way that mindfulness is delivered, and, you know, there are differences in the settings of how it was delivered, and that may affect kind of outcomes for children. But, you know, ultimately, school, nursery, these settings, reception, are good in order to do a good place to deliver mindfulness, as you can see from the top quote from Simon, is that because obviously children are spending an awful lot of time there and they can be built into the routine, although that can be quite hard when there's so much to cover for teachers and other staff. So, you know, the themes coming out, and you can see from Catherine Weir there, I've mentioned some of them already. I think that you know, I brought some of those out in the chapters. When you've got kind of here again, learning to breathe program, children being more aware of their feelings, better able to let go of thoughts of feelings that cause them distress. Okay, again, some of the principles behind the research that I conducted that I talk about in the chapter. I won't go on, I've spoken a bit about those already. And again, this was my kind of research as well, some of which I talk about in the chapter. So you know, one or two places for further information, I always put these on and this is really for adults supporting children. And one of the things that I think was really important and that came out of the research, and you know, I allude to in the chapter, is it is something that people really have to buy into and know a little bit about. And I kind of think one of my thoughts going forward is that it needs to be probably framed for children within some kind of philosophy of meditation and mindfulness, if you like, and not just an add-on. I think, you know, it does. And it's worth then the adults that are delivering that or proposing to deliver that in schools need to have some kind of an idea. And there are some really accessible books out there, 3 of which are there. And then also, you know, I've got kind of internet and social media, and you can see I've got my address there as well, but there are other people as well that work with children. And I know in the early years world, I've got Jude Brown at Coventry University, who I don't think she's here today, but you know, I've done a bit of work with her. I've worked with the Childminders UK as she has as well. Is she there? Good.
In the chat box, yeah.
Great. Yeah, that's really good. I can't see that. Oh, that's great. So Jude's here as well. So, you know, I know Jude sort of works in this arena, and yeah. So I guess you know, I'll end that now. But you know, those are my kind of that was kind of the basis for really the chapter and my research. I'll come out from that now, and I think I'm there. So I'll go onto camera now. So yeah. So that's kind of just to give you kind of a background really, and some of the things that kind of informed the chapter, which was, you know, really exciting to write. It's very exciting for me, and I guess I feel like there is a way forward, and I think in terms of the way forward, it is making sure that there's a little bit more to it than just looking at a candle, or, you know, there is a kind of build up of skills in terms of mindfulness, but also there's a bit of a philosophy behind it. You know, I'm really passionate about this area, and I suppose, you know, if it was down to me, it would be something that would be more widely brought into schools and more widely brought with young children. I think sometimes there is still, and dare I say this, in the sector, in the school and education sector, a view that young children are less capable in some ways, and that certainly wasn't backed up by my research with meditation, in which younger children responded to it really, really positively, and that has kind of informed a lot of what I've done since, and informed the kind of beliefs behind the chapter that I wrote. I hope the chapter was fairly balanced. There are, you know, some of the research didn't conclude that it was always beneficial mindfulness meditation. I think that some of that depends on how it's delivered and within what kind of atmosphere and philosophy and who it's delivered by, I guess. But those are kind of just my thoughts moving forward. Okay, so thank you for listening to me. All right.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's so lovely. Even though I've read the chapter time and time again in the editing process, it's just so lovely to hear you talk about it. Thank you. We've got some questions in the chat box. So Jude's been chatting away, which you'll see in a minute. But we've also got a question from Carl, who says he'd like to know more about your thoughts about technology, media and games, and every, in inverted commas, new fast glimpse of entertainment introduced in the early ages, and also increasing of technology in kindergarten and schools, the digital dementia in your research on mindfulness. I don't know if you touched on that.
Yeah, there is a little bit of that. That's interesting. I mean, I look at that. In fact, I was again talking about that in a lecture today. I think there are the problem is balance. balance. And I think balance is everything. And I think one of the things that we've got talking about that, Carl, is we're talking about very stimulating, aren't we? And we were talking about how children access this. And children are, they are, I think, do we call them digital natives? They're not, I mean, technology is still very much a foreign land to me, and I can kind of work things, but I kind of stab at it and jab at it with my finger and hope for the best, and then gently tap it when it goes wrong. But children are much more than that, aren't they? And what they do is they access it very, very quickly, very, very easily. And it's the swipe right culture. And I think it's balanced. And I think we're out of kilter with the balance, because, it's another source of information that goes into children's minds. It's another kind of glaring of, kind of multitude of information, and not something else that they've got to switch off from. And I think what meditation does, a couple of things that meditation does. It first of all gives them that pause and that break, but I think it does more than that. When you look at the kind of broader themes of kind of gratitude and awareness of the environment, awareness of the people around them, and awareness, increasingly, I mean, I know it's very, very controversial, but it doesn't matter which development matters you look at. The outdoor environment and the wider environment is very, very important. But I would question sometimes children's real awareness, because I think what technology brings, I think used sparingly, it's very, very good, and there's lots children can get from it. I think it becomes just an overwhelming multitude of information added to classrooms that are ultimately quite often an overwhelming multitude of information, if you like. So I think it adds another layer, and this meditation kind of offers something of an alternative to that, as well as a break from it. And I think my kind of concern going forward with it is it becomes something, and schools have a great habit of doing this, and I've worked in schools for 20 years, and they have a great habit of kind of bringing it in, we'll do that, it's another thing we've got to do, that will fit that in 5 minutes between here and here in the school day. But actually, do you know what? It's part of a philosophy. It's part of a holistic philosophy about perhaps what's important about life, about perhaps what's important about children's experience. That doesn't mean that we never ask children to look at an iPad or a game again. It means that we don't only let children look at iPads and games, if you see what I mean, in terms of experience, an experience which for many children is increasingly virtual. And I think actually, I know children find themselves in tough situations. Sometimes they're educated in, in challenging places. And I've taught in some of those where you'd be hard pushed to find a tree for a mile, but actually there's still some wonderful, wonderful things about their environments, and perhaps just being aware of the present moment, and not always thinking about what the future hopes or what the future pressures are, or being haunted by what the past was either, and just spending some time in the now. And I think that can be really beneficial. So I think it's a question of balance.
Thank you, Chris. That's really lovely to sum it up. Carl's asked another question, which I think you've gone on to answer, but I'll just leave you to have a little think about that, for everybody to be mindful about it. Now we've had such a good introduction to the topic, and we will have questions at the end of the seminar anyway. So if anybody's got any extra ones that come to light, we'll touch on those. Thank you, Chris. It was so lovely, really lovely.
Thank you.
So we next move on to the presentation from Dean-David Holyoake from the University of Wolverhampton. And Dino has a background as a CAMS practitioner, so this contributes towards our health focus. And his chapter within the book is called Solution-Focused Resilience Work, from the Fantastical to the Real. So without telling you any more about it, I'm hopefully going to pass over to Dino, and he's going to be able to put his presentation up.
Thank you. Can you see me?
I can't see you yet. No. Are you able to turn your camera off, please, Chris? Now I can see you, Dino.
Yeah.
Well done, Chris. Thank you.
I can see my all, one and all.
We've got you, Dino. That's great. Thank you.
Isn't it fantastic? This is fantastic, and I must say it's been fantastic being here throughout the day on this conference, and certainly regarding the process of writing about resilience in the book as well has really helped me progress my thinking and thoughts. And I know I haven't got long, but I figured I'd do about 3 things. I thought I'd start off by telling you something about myself, because I have to, and then I was going to do something about the chapter, and then I was going to wander out loud, maybe with some use of some slides. So I have got some slides to show you, which I'll put up
Thank you.
After, well, yeah, we'll see. This is technology for us. But a bit about myself, 30 seconds. I started on the adolescent unit working in CAMS, although CAMS didn't exist at the time, in the late 80s, and I did 25 years, a bit of this and a bit of that on inpatient and some outpatient work, working with, I suppose, what society would call the children, the hidden children. The children that were mentally ill and not well enough, and ranging from a whole bunch of medical diagnosis which was firmly impounded upon them, and from anorexia nervosa to drug misuse to schizophrenia to you name it, we'd got a diagnostic manual full of it. And at the time I was very grateful for that diagnostic manual, because without it I wouldn't have known what to do. Resilience, though, has taught me that, you know, these kids that we all been talking with, and if I was going to scale us today and scale what I've learned today from a 0 to 10, I'd probably put myself up there in the 8s, 9s and 10s, because it would seem that what we think of resilience, not as necessarily a thing in itself, but as a process, is what I've learned this morning. I've learned there's emergent definitions of what it is meant to be and established for. And that has really helped me, because I guess we're all starting to do more than our grandparents and our fathers and our mothers and other professionals that preceded us, in terms of this resilient stuff isn't exactly what the experts used to say. And it has helped me, because in my practice over those 25, 30 years, working with these mentally ill kids, is that they're the experts in their own lives. And I think, like Chris has just said as well, which was really fantastic, because I am thinking, you know what, it is about the now, and it is more about the future rather than the present. And I guess this is where my little bit with the chapter comes in. So you watch me now muck this up, but I am going to try and share something with you now. So you know,
we do have gremlins in the work today, big time. So,
hey,
we've got it.
Can you see something there? Can you see that?
We
can.
And
Can you still see me, or am I talking?
No. Oh, we can see you in a little bit down the bottom, which is perfect.
Oh, so no swearing and none of that sort of stuff.
No, best behaviour today.
All right, and so I'm going to try not to bore you. I'm going to try and inspire you and do all this sort of stuff. But I'll kick off. I'm going to talk about solution focusedness, and I'm assuming you can see the whole. Has my slide just changed, just to check, because I know there were some gremlins earlier.
Yes, it's great. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's all on there, because I've got these proper animation, but what happens is it might not be working. So no, I don't know. Right, let's have a go. So, what is solution focused stuff? We've all heard it. We've all heard about it, and we probably practice it a lot in our lives. But primarily, it's about 5 things. It's about this future focusedness. It's about gaining lots of detail, and about mundane stuff, the little things that children and certainly mentally ill young people consider big in their lives, but are often poo-pooed by us medics and professional people. It's about confidence and motivation. This is the big, and this is what's come across a lot in the conference, and I'm really joyed by this. But it's about some pragmatic stuff as well. For us in solution focusedness, if you're going to work, resilience is about seeing stuff that's different, that's changed for the child. And so it's not about a reflecting as such, it's about a reflexivity. Now it's this reflexivity stuff that has really helped me in my work, because when I'm working with young people, there's 2 scared people, at least 2 scared people in that room at any one time, because I don't go in knowing. I'm very curious, and I'm certainly not an expert in someone else's life. And I'm hearing this a lot in the conference today, and this is what we're learning about resilience, isn't it? Because when you're scared and don't know what's going on, you need quite a lot of it. All right, so I've got this route map. It's this sort of 10 things, and it's about when I'm working with any young person, whether it be for 1 minute, whether it is passing them in the corridor, or whether it's in a proper 1 hour's worth of session, this is near enough what I'm doing. I'm trying to establish these future goals. I'm trying to get some future hopes. I'm trying to encourage imagery and imagination. There's the fantastical. You know that thing when we've all hypothesized about winning the pools. What would you spend it on? That sort of thing. And within that, there's an expectation of collaboration. And I want detail. I don't want to know how people are feeling. I don't really want to know what they're thinking. I'd want to know what I would see them doing when the problem is no longer with them. And so that's a pragmaticness. Description in the same way. So what would I see happening next when the problem's no longer with us? What would I see? I want to enlarge and emerge possibilities. I want to eliminate and distract. I want them motivated, and I'm going to try and disrupt them to do that. But I'm going to talk about that on my next slide. So, in trust, they're in charge. They're the boss. And resilience is one of these things. Imagine if all through your life you've been told you're a bit schizophrenic and this, that and the other, and you find yourself in a CAMS unit and you've never been able to trust yourself because no one's ever trusted you. And it's a big step for lots of young people who I've worked with, I reckon. And I always end with an experiment and a task. Always end with something that they can measure themselves against, and they can become more resilient. That's the idea. And so in the book chapter, I sort of go through this route map, sometimes clumsily, but on the whole, and that has helped me think, really. And so it is a bit of a question for us. I have actually got a strange question. Imagine that we leave this conference and we go about the rest of our day and we go to bed tonight. And a miracle occurs. A miracle occurs when you're asleep. And everything we've discussed at this conference, all the good stuff, all the successes, all those little ideas that have sparked your imagination to write that next article, to attend that next conference, become real. Then you wake up. But because we've all been asleep, because you were asleep, you didn't know the miracle had occurred. What would be the first sign? What would be the first small thing that would tell you, that's strange. A miracle must have happened. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the sort of stuff I do to try and keep myself resilient and young people. The fantastical. You see, I've got small goals there. The goals are important. We always come back to that notion of the goals. But in the fantastical, I get my young people. I get my young people. They get me. We collaborate in such a way. Hope. A real human concern. I disrupt their usual patterns of thinking. I get them to imagine miracles. I get them to wave magic wands, and I get them to look into crystal balls. What might be? What could be? There's a balance, though. You've got to be skilled. You get it wrong, they're going to go, you're demeaning my issue. And we all know what I mean by that. But this in the fantastical is this idea that all notions of change, of self-improvement, of resiliency sort of stuff, starts probably in the imagination. That's certainly the SF way anyway. Making of the real. How do you make the fantastical real? We indulge the hope and we continually come back to the goal. We visualize the goal and we detail it. We visualize it. It's not real. We just visualize what happens when I've won £1 million. I just visualise when Judy has stopped self-harming. I just visualise maybe she only cuts herself once that day instead of the usual out of controlness. Maybe when I'm working with Rob, who's 16, has got no reason to do anything, he's got no authority figures in his life, maybe what's that one thing that he does different by the end of the day that we'd notice, that we'd actually see. And then we do a task. The task. What sort of task would you do? So we said earlier about those miracles that we thought about when we were talking about resilience would be, well, I've been inspired because I know I'm no longer alone. There's a group of us here and in that book that are sort of saying the same thing. Isn't that fantastic? So what do I need to do? What would that task be? Well, who knows? But to sort of round up, if nothing else, appreciate what you do not notice, because resilience may reside in the real, but it definitely is made in the fantastical by the fantastic. And I think that's what this book has helped me to do, because I hadn't really appreciated just how much work I do. You know, those 10 things we did. So I start off and we get a goal and we go through, and then I future hopes, and I go for now, get to 10, which is this task or experiment. Somewhere over half of my work is done imagining. God, John Lennon springs to imagining. Okay, no more John. But there is, whereas I suspect when I first started in CAMS all those years ago, everything was about the real. It was about the physical and about the material. And it was very much the Mr. Bounderby of Charles Dickens in Hard Times, the opening of that book. Facts, teach these children facts. Nothing but facts. But what they taught me, what these kids have taught me, is that, you know, facts are important, but so is that imaginative stuff. Yeah. So I'm gonna stop sharing now, if that's all right, in the slideshow. So am I back now? Hello?
I can hear you, Dean.
Can you see me now?
I can see you now, but your slide's still up.
Oh, has it? Have I not stopped sharing? There we go. Hello?
Great, thank you. That's great.
I had this terrible feeling right there at this moment, folks, because we all know what it's like, and it's this mad moment, and it's technological. And I suddenly thought, I've been talking to myself for the last 10 minutes, which isn't unusual in my life. But, and so now I figured, if there was a task, normally I'd end with a message. And I would say something like, wow, thank you for putting up with me today. Thank you for seeing me today. I really do appreciate the enormity of the problem that's facing you or whatnot. And I suppose I've also appreciated the enormity of the issue of this resilience stuff in education, in psychology, in mindfulness, in policy development. That was really interesting this morning. And of course, the international flavour to it. Non parlo bene Italiano. I don't speak very good Italian though, but it has been absolutely fantastic. And so the message would be, well, maybe it's not something that we're trying to stop anymore. Maybe it's not about stopping stuff, but what could we do more of? What are the things in our resiliency type lives, or in our interest in resilience, that we'd want to do more of, or at least maintain? And I guess that would be the task for me. And that's going to be the task I'm going to take away from being involved with this book and being involved today with this, with you guys. And I'm going to leave it at that. Always leave people hankering for more. That's what I say. But if there is any questions or whatnot, great.
Thank you so much. It's just lovely. We've got a lovely sort of wind down to the end of the day now. And
wind up, was that? Wind up.
A wind down, I promise. I said wind down. I was waiting for you to say something about the key, but you didn't mention the key.
I didn't want to get bogged down in rocks. Okay, well, I will briefly. The thing about the key, and certainly in the book, because I managed to get a picture. I've got a picture, and I know it caused a bit of that, but I'm very pleased with the key. The idea of the key in solution focus stuff is, and I've seen it a lot, I think we're all heading in this direction. It's just in solution focus psychotherapy, or solution focus brief psychotherapy practice, or narrative practice, or networking practice. We've emerged this idea that we do not need to know the problem in order to seek and search for a solution. We don't need to know the problem as such. And underlying that in terms of the philosophy would be, I only need one key to open all locks. It doesn't matter the nature of the diagnosis for a child. For me, I use the same key. So in the book chapter, I talk about Rob, who's this this chap who's got no authority figures, and he's not alone. We all know Rob. We've all met Robs. And I've got Claire, who's anorexic or eating disorders, as I prefer to say. And then I've got Judy, who's self-harming behaviour with lots of complex needs. We know this. I would use that miracle question with them. And I'd get hopefully different answers. Well, no, I normally get, I don't know, I've never thought about that. And then I have to nudge him. I go, go on, have a go. No, I don't want to play. And so in the book, I talk about 3 what we call skeleton keys. Remember the 1970s with the you lot aren't old enough, but in the 70s there was all of these criminal type programs where American cops would sneak into unsuspecting apartments of, and they'd always have these keys that you could open any lock, and that's the idea of the skeleton key. But you're just going to have to buy the book if you want to know any more. You see what I did?
Thank you. It's very good. Thank you. And Lydia has a question as well. What's your question, Lydia?
Hello again. Thanks, Dean. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on this. You were saying about the problems of a diagnostic approach and diagnostic models and of labelling with obviously across the board, but particularly for children and young people, and also how that actually has this kind of problematic effect of that you sort of losing kind of trust in yourself as well, because everything's kind of undermined by this psychiatric diagnosis potentially. And then I thought you were kind of describing more of a kind of humanistic approach that you were taking, in the sense of quite a very sort of person-centered approach.
Is that the question? Only because.
Well, the question was, sorry, you might want to comment on that as well, but how you would whether you would describe yourself in humanistic. But the question's more, I was just sort of thinking, so do you find it difficult working, in the area of mental health, in that there is this kind of still quite sort of dominant sort of psychiatric diagnostic framework that, that is present, and then that you are wanting to work outside of? Also, I was thinking of the, there've been the criticisms of this whole sort of mental health agenda for education, risking the sort of further incursion of psychiatric discourse and sort of, I suppose you might call clinical psychological discourse into schools, and things like mental health first aid, and within these kind of diagnostic sort of approaches, whereas which may actually be incompatible with educational approaches in certain ways. I think people often haven't sort of recognised that, but obviously there's quite a lot of sort of backlash on the part of educational professions. Like, hang on a minute, this is a different sort of paradigm, but but there always has been this kind of problem of sort of labelling in our education system as well. Anyway, but which could be made worse potentially by this whole agenda. I just wondered whether you had any reflections on all of this.
I suspect, like us all, I want to sometimes shake us all and go, even that. It's hard, because having spent a lot of time around psychiatry, I'm quite anti-psychiatry, hence the solution focusedness. So generally, solution focusedness approach is very social constructionist and therefore not really humanist. And so it gets all theoretically difficult. And we're on this moment of this as well, which we're sorting it out theoretically. So in most solution focused circles, there's some confusion. We're still trying to define it. We're still quite young. We're quite new. in that respect. Where humanism is probably very empathetically based and it's very essentialist in terms of philosophical positioning, we're definitely anti-essential. We would see most of the work being done in between things. So in that way, we're acting networky and connecty. But all of that, so how it shows itself is that, and I guess like most of us, haven't we all been in those meetings where tripartite funding, that was a fun thing during the 90s, wasn't it? Where education would pay their bit and psychiatry would pay their bit and social services would pay, and and we just want to, and we leave our review meetings and whatever, and we're just shaking our heads. And this is what I'm sort of seeing with us today, isn't it? We're sort of going, but we're onto something, because like never before, resilience has always been that thing, because maybe the young people and the families I've worked with in the past, maybe all they've ever had is themselves. And maybe they are the experts in their lives. But it's been interesting from the other talks, the Italian talk, and the Scandinavian, is that the large discourse is there, isn't it? So what can a poor child and family do, or is referred to somewhere, and the huge mythology of psychiatry is overlooming, and you need a diagnosis and they're relieved to get a diagnosis in order to get a school placement, in order to and as you say, mental health first aid now and whatnot. I think it's all great. I like the idea of I suppose the localization of it, but in what way do most people feel equipped to be as skilled as a CAMHS professional in a tier 3 setting? And it all gets all a bit and at the end of the day, it always seems to me, when I'm sitting next to that young person who's very glad to have, they're very proud of their diagnosis. I have young people bound up to me and go, "Oh, I'm a personality disorder. At least I know what I am now." and you all experience this, don't you, in various settings, and to which I'd be sort of going, well, how do I make the resilience issue, or in this particular case, what is the resilience about that? Well, what wouldn't you change? What happens if you do nothing then? What have all of the previous other experts in your life suggested you should do? And then generally do the opposite. That's sort of resilience, but it's that frustration. I suspect, and listening to your talk earlier, and certainly speaking the other day, I reckon we share a sort of frustration. I'm hearing the same type of frustration from us all, isn't it? To sort of, but the thing I will take away in terms of that miracle or the task for me, I know the miracle has occurred because I'm no longer alone. That's the first thing I see. The next thing I see is that we're all sort of know there's something. We can trust the client. I trust Rob and Judy and Claire in my chapter to know what's good for them, even if it's self-harming. And I suspect what we leave at the end of the day is that these young people can make a difference in their own lives if they're given the conditions. Oh, crikey. And I guess the big discourse is they're never going to be given the condition. But what's that one small thing I might be able to do in that 1 hour I get every week? Boom. I don't know. It's if I scaled myself lower on the scale, it's a skeleton care scale. Skeleton care, memory opens any lock. Then I'm going to get depressed. If I start to think, well, what are the things that pump me up to the top? It would be that we'd be working better. But would you say the same, Lydia? Would you say the same?
What? Well, I don't work directly with children and young people at the moment, but yeah, I mean, I think it's a big problem to sort of deflect that whole, like you say, sort of psychiatrization and so on from the world of education, because I think what you're getting, I mean, my work's more in the area of adult community learning. One of the sort of benefits of sort of and there is targeted mental health provision, but one of the benefits is that you're stepping outside of all of that stigmatizing, pathologizing lot into an educational setting and framework, for people that, oh, thank God I don't have to be have a sort of mental illness identity in this setting anymore, so the idea of then sort of bringing that more into kind of schools and so on, you know, and like you say, the pathologization, you know, and because it's so dominant, then people themselves are quite sort of willing to subjectify themselves, that there can be benefits for people. It provides one way of understanding experiences, but because it's dominant, but obviously there are others, you know, and it's sort of seductive. It can, you know, it potentially be obviously cause more harm than good, you know.
Yeah. Do you think there is a sticking plaster for, I don't know, I open it up to everyone else, or I don't know. Is there a sticking plaster? So, because at least, do you think the big story of it, the big discourse is, well, at least we can feel good about ourselves because we're doing something about something. Whereas in reality, certainly in the SF approach, we try and disrupt diagnosis as much as possible. So I very rarely talk about diagnosis with a young person. So say if Judy comes up to me and she goes, yeah, because I'm personality disorder now, self-harms, and I'm really, you know, I will probably ignore that totally all the way through. And every time it comes up, I'm going to stick with the goal in mind.
I do think, sorry, I won't dominate the discussion anymore, Zita, but just to respond to that, I do think we need to be reflective about that we're just not sort of trying to make ourselves feel better by doing something therapeutic. And a lot of sort of critical theorists in the area say, well, the best thing you can do is focus on the education, you know, and stop sort of, you know, going down that sort of path if you're an education kind of mental health, you know, and just sort of try to focus on giving people a good education. So yeah, it's open to debate.
Is it a moment of our time as well? Is it that us as practitioners and artists and educators and whatnot are starting to go, well, because resilience is something for me in terms of actor network. It's definitely something that's in between things. It's the thing. I think it might have been you or one of the speakers earlier in the morning had sort of spoke about resilience no longer being a thing as such, being that so and we've all sort of said, look, long gone are those days now when we consider it something as a lack, because all of our young people in CAMS are full of lack. And they've got no resilience, they've got no self-control, they've got no sense of duty, they've got nothing. And at least it feels to me as though we're getting beyond that, and us in this discussion isn't that so that miracles occurred again. That's another thing I would see. That's another thing I would see that is happening in our practice. But what will our grandchildren say of us? God, I just slipped into a bit of Braveheart then. I don't know how I did that.
I am really so sorry, but we have to end it here. But thank you so much, Dino. Thank you. It's been really
no. Thank you all for putting up with it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We just wanted Sarah and I just wanted to say at the end that we're just really thankful for all of you being here today, and also for everybody that's contributed to the book. Sarah and I want to send out a big thanks to all of you, and how wonderful it's been to work with you all over these last 5 years. And I think I'm hoping that all of you that have attended today can see how proud and pleased we all are of this book, and how much we really hope that it's going to impact on thinking and practice around childhood resilience and well-being, and what could become of it, really. What we'd love you to do as you leave, if that's okay, is if you could just write a comment in the chat about your experience of attending today, any take-home messages, and also if you've got any ideas of what we could maybe do next with the content of the book, that would be great. So we just want to say thank you for attending. Sarah, do you want to say goodbye as well?
I do indeed. Goodbye as well, but a bit more than that. Just to say thank you very much, everybody, for enabling us today, for being able to deliver on such a grey, miserable day when this has been such a really heartwarming experience. Just lovely, absolutely lovely. And thank you very much for putting up with the techie issues as well. We really, really have had gremlins in the work today. Do take care of yourselves. We would normally say have a safe journey home, but obviously that's just making sure you get down the stairs properly or something like that. So do take care of yourselves, particularly in the pandemic, and we wish everybody a very restful and peaceful time. Thank you.
Just to say, sorry, just as you're going as well, is that the video is in this Teams link, but also it will be on the Education Observatory website too. And if you do want a copy of it and you can't get access from either of those pages,